Welcome back to Tell Me More with CJ. Today, we're going to talk about leadership. The reason we're going to talk about leadership is because leadership is one of the most important things on this earth. Whether you are leading yourself, your family, an organization, it doesn't matter. I've had a million jobs. I've been working since I was 15 years old. First job was in a daycare. Next job was in a parking lot, and so on and so on. I've done everything from teaching math to Vietnamese kids, which I actually don't really know how I did that back in college. I had did cold calls for an insurance agent. I worked courtside at sports arenas. I've worked in finance. I've run nonprofits. I've started a nonprofit. I've been a professor. And if there's one thing that I have learned in this life, it is that organizations rise and fall based on leadership. Man, I heard this really great quote the other day, and I wish I had wrote it down, but it was something like, a good leader will not be responsible for all of the organization's success, but a bad leader can be responsible for all of an organization's failure. And I have found in my career for that to be so true. And unfortunately in my career, I have seen a whole lot of bad leadership. If you don't believe me, please allow me to give you some examples. First, there is the person I worked for who ran their department on fear. And when I say I ran their department on fear, that is exactly what I mean. So this was back in my finance days, and I get into this bank and I'm young, I'm excited, I'm hungry, and I noticed something particular. So the woman who ran this department, there were about 4 other women in the department who all worked for her for about 20 years or so. Everyone had been with her for a really long time. And then there were 3 young guys who had all been there for between 6 months and let's call it a year and a half. And you know, when you walk into a place, you can just feel the atmosphere, right? This place was very somber. And I was like, okay, that's pretty interesting, but whatever. I'm going to keep going with it. I quickly discovered that this woman ruled with an iron fist, and according to her, she got a psychology degree in the 80s, so she knows people. Her whole thing was fear and mind games. So one day, now mind you, I'm about 25-ish, 25, 26. One day, a colleague walks past my desk, an older woman, and she throws a Post-it at me. So she walks by, she's like, da-da-da-da-da, whap, and keeps going. And I look, and it's her phone number, and it says, call me. Now, mind you, I'm engaged, and I'm thinking to myself, oh, I gotta let this old lady down gently. She sees the young guy, she's into me. Listen, I had a very big head when I was younger, so bear with young CJ. And so, I call her later that day. I gotta see her at work every day. I'm thinking to myself, I'm gonna give her the nice, easy letdown speech. First thing she says to me is, hey, I didn't want her to see me talking to you because it would have been hell for all of us. And I'm like, what kind of place do we work in where coworkers are afraid to be seen talking to each other? She then spent the next 30 minutes of the conversation giving me advice on how to deal with this particular manager. Needless to say, she was not interested in that little boy and was simply trying to help. Listen, if you are leading a department and people are afraid to talk to each other in your presence, you are a bad leader. I also had the leader who was, we'll call it, emotionally immature. This particular leader would walk around and blow up at everybody over the smallest things. He would give people the silent treatment. He was known for throwing things around the office when upset. And people would look at him and go, oh, well, that's just the way it is, right? This was the person who would walk around and say, I don't do emotions. Those are for weak people. This is a person who would wear their lack of empathy with a badge of honor. If that's you as a leader, it's no good, to say the least. Jim Vanderhei, in his book, Jim Vanderhei is the founder of Politico and eventually went on to found Axios. In his book, Just the Good Stuff, Jim Vanderhei says that leadership now is so much more about EQ than it is IQ. Listen, back in the Mad Men days, 30, 40 years ago, you could be the ruler with an iron fist. You could be the one who didn't deal with emotions and didn't have to, bother with your people. But that's not the world we live in today. And as a big part of what we do here is talking about and focusing on Gen Z, this is the most emotionally, I'll call them the most emotionally mature generation that we've had. They may not have all of the maturity and, they lack a lot of just key skills that come with life, but they come in with a lot of language and an ability to name what they feel and why they feel it. And if you are going to be the type of leader who cannot deal with your people's emotions, oh, you're already behind. Then, of course, I've had the leaders who thought that their ideas were the only good ideas, and anyone who tried to challenge them, they would simply snuff them out. My hope in what we do here on this channel and on the Substack and on the podcast is to rescue us from bad leadership. I'm here to help. I've managed dozens of people in my career, and I can be honest enough to say that there were times I was a really good leader. And then there were times where I was a really bad leader. So much of my leadership was trial by fire. See, when I was in finance, I was a low man on the totem pole at the bottom of the rung. And when you work at some of the big banks that I've worked at, they let you know very quickly that you can be replaced. That you are simply another cog in the machine, another number on a list. You do not matter. So I went from that environment to suddenly being thrust to the top. When I worked for the organization that did short-term service projects in New York City, I was at the top of my city. I ran everything. I was responsible for programming, directing, hiring, firing. It was all on me, managing and leading a team. And there's a big difference between leadership and management, and we'll come back to that. But I suddenly had to figure out, what did it mean for me to be a leader? Someone who inspired people and galvanized them. Someone who made people feel safe, psychologically safe, emotionally safe, someone who led from the front, someone who wasn't asking people to do things that I would never do myself. What did it mean for me to truly be a leader? If you're trying to grow in your leadership, or maybe trying to navigate working with a bad leader, I'm here to help, because I've walked those roads, both of them actually. Having to grow in my leadership, and I am still growing in my leadership in my current position where I'm leading people on various levels. And then I've needed to be rescued from bad leaders, multiple bad leaders. In fact, when you have had a career like mine, it can really start to mess with you, make you ask questions about yourself, like, what's wrong with me? Am I broken? But then I talk to people and I share stories. And they're like, nah, bro, it's not you. You've just had some really bad luck. So this is the place the conversations will happen. I'll cover different topics and I'll help us be better leaders. And on the podcast, I interview a ton of different people about leadership. What makes a good leader? What are the best qualities? What are things that they've seen? So make sure you subscribe to that. Make sure you subscribe to the Substack where I write about leadership as well. And hey, if you're leading Gen Z and you have no idea what to do with them, then check out this video on why I'm writing about them and why I'm choosing to focus a lot of my work on them. Because this is the group that, if you're a millennial like me, this is the group you're managing. So it's best for us to know what to do, how to do it, and not leave a trail of bodies behind us as we try to be better leaders. So stay tuned and join me next time as I ask you to tell me more.